he knew that Joseph knew that he was a favorite child. And, trust me, kids spotted really quickly, even as an infant or a toddler who has not learned to speak yet, they understand when they're favored over other people. You can see that from daycare centers or in your neighborhoods, right, in your relatives. So Joseph knew that very early on. Oh, I am a very special child, and he developed this pride, which is part of sin. It's part of the sinful nature of human beings, right? Because God is a humble God. He does not. He is not the origin of pride. Who is the prime origin of pride? That was Satan, the enemy of God. That was his number one thing. And because of his pride, he rebelled against God, thinking to himself, I will take his position. I will be God. I'll actually kick him out. I'll be God and I'll rule over the world. That was his plan, along with his angels, follower angels, who were like 1/3 of the entire number of angels that God had, which is a tremendous number, you better believe it. And that's part of the reason we have so much evil going on in this world. Can you imagine? 1/3 of all the angels came down to the earth with Satan to do evil against us. But in the midst of that, why does the sun rise? Or, it's rather the earth spinning, but it's an expression, right? The sun rises and sun sets as it should. And we see in the midst of all the problems, the world is going on. Life is going on as they should, but because God is stronger, God is faithful. If Satan is in charge, we're in charge, our life would have been really miserable, and this earth will no longer be livable at all. Because when Satan is in charge, that means God's presence is not there. Because when God's presence is there, Satan has to leave. So I'm not saying that when we put our faith in Jesus Christ and become a believer, there will be no more evil, no more attacks, and no more darkness. That's not what I'm saying. Interestingly, we're like a battle zone. This world is like a battle zone. God wants to win his children over to himself so that they can fully enjoy all the gifts that God has given us for this life, and at the same time run the good race, remain faithful, and be gathered to himself in the end so that we can go to heaven. That is God's desire, burning desire. However, Satan found out a long time ago, he's very smart, found out a long time ago that he's not going to win the war in the end. He already lost by the power of Jesus, who stamped on him, who stepped over him and crushed him by the cross, by the seemingly unwise way of dealing with the problem. But that was amazing wisdom of God that actually trampled the enemy down. But the enemy found out, because he's technically, he lost the war, but he is for some reason allowed to act, go around and do his work still until the very end, when God says, okay, now it's judgment time. So he's doing everything. Like, he's thinking, okay, because I am doomed to go to hell and I lost the war, what is the thing that I can hurt God the most? Is that I drag down with me all these God's children to hell. I'm going to burn in hell. Let me just gather more people to myself and drag them down to the burning place so that God's heart will be hurt. So that is his ultimate plan. And so now the purpose of Christian education is that by different approaches and the different channels, we connect with God and become one with Him and be restored to God's image, which is the original intention of God, so that and then we will run the race really faithfully until the end, by keeping our faith, and the faith grows. It has life. Faith will grow, and in the end, we're going to turn out to be really beautiful inside out, and that will be gathered into God's arms, called heaven. And so Christian education is, in a way, saying, stop the enemy's work. Okay, we're not going to just sit there and be under attack. We are going to wage a war against them, not with physical weapons or by human force or anything like that. No, by the word of God, by living according to His will, despite all the distraction and temptations and trials, right? Despite all the hindrances, I'm going to choose God. That's how we engage in the battle. And in the end, Christian education is supposed to guide us to the right direction, so that we'll be the right track. When we look back at the end of our lives, we will have no regrets. Meaning, every life has regrets. I know that. Because we are imperfect. I mean, we have to live with the fact, and we have to die with the fact, accepting the fact that we are not perfect, and we will never be perfect on this earth. And we may not be able to achieve everything that we desire to achieve, or sometimes go beyond our imaginations. Either way, because of our imperfection, we will always have some kind of regrets. Oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. I could have done this better. I could have been nicer to that person. Oh, I could have given more. I could have prayed more. I could have, should have said, what else? However, does not mean that we have this sense of relief and satisfaction in that, yes, I really fought hard to be faithful to God. I really did my best to hold on to God. I really gave my whole life to God. I loved Him. I experienced His love. And I came to understand what's important in life. It's not fame. It's not wealth. It's not power that the world tempts us with. Always, those three things are there, right? And that's the Satan's scheme, actually. However, I found something more important than that. Even if I don't have any of that, I found that there's something greater than my being. I found that there are values that are more important than that. That are joy and satisfaction actually do not come from accumulating wealth and power and prestige and fame. Actually, it comes from love. It comes from knowing God. It comes from the understanding and living a lifestyle of loving others who are also very cherished in God's eyes. And just becoming more and more like my Creator, becoming more and more like my Father, because I came from Him. So just our perspective shifts drastically once we come to understand who God is, that we get to personally meet Jesus Christ. And so that is about Christian movement and Christian education. And so it's very different than other kinds of education per se, although you are sitting in your own room, and hopefully by latter part of this year that we'll have in-person classes, and you'll be sitting here, and it'll be a lot of information. It'll be time of conversing with each other, discussing with each other. Yes. So in that sense, it's kind of similar to other classes. However, Christian education is different than that, in that it you can say that you have gone through Christian education if you apply the truth in your life and your life was transformed, if you chose the pattern of Christ-likeness so that in the end you are a different person, that living like Christ became like a lifestyle of yourself. It became a lifestyle. It became a practice. It became like a habit, good habit. Then you can say, oh yeah, I received Christian education, although it's an ongoing thing. And yes, I actually came to like a point of mastery to some point, some degree. I learned it. I learned Christian education. If you are able to say that, then it means that your life has changed, that your lifestyle has changed, right? So then, see, this is all intertwined. There's a reason I'm talking about these biblical passages in conjunction with the pieces of information that we're going to talk about in chapter 2. And so Joseph was very arrogant, he was prideful, and he was not liked by his brothers. Can you imagine? You are only a teenager and we saw you being born, you were a baby, I was already 12, I was already 15, I was already 20 when you were born. And who do you think you are that you become so arrogant and you say like, what? But according to your dream, we know that you dream, but your dreams are offensive to us. You're saying that we're gonna one day bow down to you. How dare? What? Our parents are going to bow down to you? Just get out of here. And he was bringing bad reports about his brothers, which is not a very good idea. And whenever Joseph was sent as a messenger or whoever to check on the brothers, always there were bad consequences, right? Because if he brought like bad reports, then probably his father scolded them and punished them in some way, which is really unpleasant. And look at him, he's wearing this colorful robe that symbolizes outwardly, like very obviously, very clearly, that he is the heir. He's like a prince. Like, oh, only if Joseph did not exist, then we could have been treated more fairly, with more care and love and respect. So let's get rid of him was their ideas. So not everyone agreed, but there were some brothers who were like, you know what, let's just get rid of him altogether. And so they planned to actually kill him. Reuben tried to save him, and Judah tried to save him in some way. But while Reuben went away, because they threw him into a cistern. A cistern is pretty big and you can't come out by yourself. And it's a good thing that there was no water inside. But Reuben tried to rescue him after, brothers went away. But he went away somewhere, he came back and Joseph was gone, because he was sold to the hands of the Ishmaelite merchants. Basically, these are slave merchants. In those days, slaves and servants were given. It was considered as something normal to have in those societies, like both Hebrew society and also in the Egyptian society. It was pretty common. And today we look at it from a completely different perspective, I know. But at that time, he was sold. Joseph was sold. The prince who didn't have to work hard, he probably had this like clean, soft hands, who have never done any hard work. And he was sold as a slave. And believe me, a slave, and especially if you came from a different ethnic group, these are all Egyptians. Joseph doesn't speak their language. Joseph does not know their culture. And he's young, and there were probably other Egyptian slaves, and he must have been mistreated in some way. But God was with Joseph. That was a key point that we talked about last time, right? Although he faced the most tragic circumstances, which is to be abandoned, hated and abandoned by his own brothers, and then sold into slavery at the age of 17. And he was not a student. I mean, I understand that some of you, many of you actually came here with a student visa, right? And it was hard enough for you to make that transition from coming from one country to another, and all that. So very interestingly, I mean, you probably understand the transition that it takes. Just starting from food. Although LA County is full of like Asian population, and you will be able to find some food out there, but still, you come out here. I was in a different state before, and it was not like Los Angeles, and so you had to drive miles and miles in order to taste any kind of Asian food, and it was just not as good. And so like I learned to cook at home, because that was better. But just food is different, people are different. It's just like you lost your friends and relationships and connections, all these familiar people, and especially, as a 17-year-old, you still need your parents, and, just leaving your parents, and you don't know if you ever will be able to see them again. So we can kind of imagine, empathize with Joseph, right? But he didn't come as a student, he came as a slave. And so it's a very different life. But nevertheless, the scripture emphasizes over and over again that God was with Joseph. And that's kind of significant to me because, well, when these horrible things happen, how is it that God is with us? We asked that question throughout last year probably, like if God exists and if He's good and loving, as Christianity says, then why are we going through this? Why do bad things exist? Why do good people get penalties and they seem to go through such hard times when the evil people seem to live an easier life and they seem to be doing fine, right? So it's really our understanding on our perspectives are really limited. If you ever have a child of your own, I've worked at a daycare center and I've babysat so many kids, and I came to realize that the child's understanding is very different from adults' understanding. And the child, for example, say it's she, right? She wants candy. There was a kid when I was receiving some kind of training, in Hawaii. There was a kid in the community. She was like 2, and she barely talked, but she knew the word "candy, please," and she would go around different neighborhoods because she knows that she's loved, and people want to make her happy. And so, without any thoughts, and although her mom asked, please don't give her any more sugar, but we did not realize how bad it was. And so whatever candies and chocolates that we had, we're like, okay, here. And she knew. So she would go around neighborhoods, knocking on the doors, candy, please. And she's just so overjoyed whenever she gets a piece of candy, because it's like an intense dose of sugar. We saw her facial expressions, just like, I got what I want. But then what happens when her pockets are full of candies and she goes back home, and she's like trying to hide because she knows that her mom does not like her to have candy, at least that much. And so mom is like, okay, what do you have in your pockets? Nothing, mom, and mom finally finds out, oh, come on, what's this? Where did you get this? I didn't give them to you. And I'm like, yeah, so and so gave me. And mom probably takes them away. All right. Say her name is Hannah. Hannah, I know you love this. We'll give them to you one by one, but we're not gonna give you like 20 of this, like for you to have like in the next hour. So let mommy keep them, and then I'll give it to you. And she's like, I'm just using an imaginative scenario. She probably goes ballistic. She's like, mine, mine. You know, I practically earned them. I went around the neighborhood, knocked on the door, and they gave them to me. It's mine. Okay, so her understanding of possession. Okay, she actually didn't work hard for it. You know, she didn't earn money in order to go to a store to buy them. But nevertheless, because she asked each person and she earned them that way, it's hers, right? It's mine. And why are you taking away mine? So she was like, you don't love me anymore. You know, like probably a toddler can't talk that eloquently, but you know, somehow like she has this feeling, you take away what I like, and therefore you are bad. I'm good. I don't know why this is happening. You say you love me. Why are you taking away my candies, right? Number one, she doesn't realize that overdose of candies are not good for her. Number two, she doesn't realize that initial surge, like sugar surge that makes her happy, is only temporary. She doesn't realize that precisely because her parents love her, they can't give her that much candy. And that they actually are not taking away hers. They're just withholding like too much so that they can actually give her whatever she is able to take it, right? And in fact, the parents are not really interested in the candies either. You know, they're like, they don't eat candies. So at least in this family, right? There are parents who eat candies, but you know, in this family, they're not interested. So the child's understanding is very limited compared to how the parents view. Like the parents view it from a bigger perspective. The parents are saying, all right, so you learned by secret, you can knock on the door of the neighbors, and you can get free candies. Number one, I'm really concerned about you because there's a reason I'm not giving you all those candies. I could have bought like sacks and sacks of candies and give them to you, but I don't give them to you because that's not good for you. And now you learned a sideways, like a different way of bypassing me to get the candies. I'm concerned about you. Number two, if you take 20 candies a day, then you're going to lose tons of calcium. You're not going to grow well. You're going to have to go see a dentist very soon, and your body will start falling apart. You will not feel like eating any regular meals because you have so much sugar, and therefore you are going to get sick in the end. By the way, you need to also learn self-control at that age, and I'm disciplining you. So, like, the mother has a different perspective than the child, right? So I just gave you a very simple example. The child is just not able to see all that because a child has limited perspectives, limited experience, limited knowledge, and the child certainly is not able to see things beyond certain time. So here and now, like give it to me now. Like now I want it. Is their understanding, their understanding of the world. Like I want it now. I want the pleasure. But then mom has a longer perspective. Okay, and if you are like this in 5 to 10 years, you're gonna even shorter. 2-3 years later, you're gonna turn out to be really unhealthy, and you know you're gonna develop like diseases. But the child is unable to think beyond now, think beyond today, think beyond a week later, think beyond a month or a year. So their perspectives are different because they have different limitations. Okay, so God is unlimited in his understanding. He's not bound by time or space, but we are. And so certainly he's in a different dimension. And he's able to see longer, he's able to see from multi perspectives. He is able to see the entire picture from beginning to the end because he's the Alpha and Omega. And so when things happen, like Joseph had to go through so much, poor guy. But in the end, what came out of the bad circumstances is that he still chose to trust God. We can tell that because of the ending. We can see that all along the way. He probably struggled and wrestled, but he chose God in the end. And so then good things come out of this thing. This series of tragic events, unbelievable. But actually God turns things around. God utilizes evil to make the good come out of it. And so we sometimes even think, oh, did God put him into the prison? Did God make this happen? We're not sure. But God certainly utilized those opportunities to make Joseph, make a leader out of him, make a God-fearing leader out of him. And then, can we dismiss his sufferings? Like, okay, so you should be okay. You should be always like smiling and say that everything is okay, because ultimately, look at you. You turned out to be a prime minister of Egypt, and this is like incredible promotion, incredible thing that happened. So you should just forget the past and just be happy. Probably there are some scars. Probably he had to go through a lot of processing. And it was certainly not enjoyable. It was major suffering. It was painful. To be abandoned and betrayed and hated and attacked and manipulated and lied to by your own family. That's not pleasant. That's not really helpful. However, Joseph had a very different understanding now. Okay, now I used to complain. I used to shake my fist against you, saying that you are not fair. I never deserved this. But now I'm kind of embarrassed to the degree because now that I look back, oh, you were there. You were certainly there, and you did not miss even a bit. You were like so holding on to me, and your careful hands were guiding me, and I just didn't realize. I just didn't feel your presence. So my hope and prayer is that as we actually read through the passage and unpack it, that we're going to come to an understanding, like our perspectives of our own lives, or the life circumstances, or the circumstances of the world will be looked at from a different perspective. So Joseph was sold into slavery. He worked really hard, but because God was with him, his boss, Potiphar, he was sold as a slave, but very interestingly, he was sold as a slave to Potiphar, who was the Pharaoh's guard, chief guard, meaning he was one of the highest people in Egypt, probably number 2 guy after Pharaoh. And he had very close connection. He had access to Pharaoh, right? And out of all the people that he could have been sold to, Joseph was sold into the hands of Potiphar. And while he was serving as a slave, he was noticed by Potiphar. Potiphar just saw him. There's something different about this Hebrew slave. Why is he so different? Aside from the fact that he looked different, probably because he was of a different ethnic group, but also the fact that he was pretty young. However, there was something about him. The presence of God, God's favor. And so Potiphar is just like, oh, you know what? I love this guy and I want to raise him. I want to give him a better position. And you know what? He's so trustworthy. Actually, I'm going to tell him to be in charge of my own household so that I can just care about what I eat and drink, and I'll take care of like outside matters. So like here, Joseph. So it probably took some time for him to make that decision, but Joseph was entrusted with great responsibilities at home. Now, Potiphar's wife was not a very ethical person, and she saw that Joseph was growing up, beyond teenage years, and he probably turned 20, 25, 27, and he became a handsome man. And she felt physically attracted to him, and she wanted to sleep with him. And believe it or not, in those era, even today, people with power and position abuse and misuse their power sometimes, right? But she certainly misused her power and said, you better come and sleep with me. She said that a few times, and Joseph, he said, your husband, my master, entrusted into my care everything, every position, and every duty in this household. That much he trusts me. So the only thing that he doesn't want me to touch is you, and if I do that, then I'm betraying my master. But more importantly, I am going against God, because God is good and he's watching. I can't do this. That was his answer. And then obviously Potiphar's wife is not a God-fearing person. She's like, okay, this is kind of unusual. Everyone says yes to me, but you better come to me. And so she did that several times, every day, in fact. And Joseph chose not to be even with her. It must have been really hard to live in the same household and not be together, right? But he just somehow fled from the possibilities, and she got angry. And so one day there was nobody home. Oh, how unfortunate, right? And so then he's tested with the greatest testing of all. So Potiphar's wife says, come on and sleep with me. This is your last chance. And he says, I can't do this. And he tries to run away, but Potiphar's wife grabs onto his robe. And so then his robe is torn. So Potiphar's wife has part of his robe in her hands, and Joseph actually just quickly took off his garment and ran away, because he knew that if he were to keep his garment, then he would be kept near her and might be forced to do something that he really didn't want to do. And so he ran away. Now Potiphar's wife screams and yells so that everyone could hear and could come and rush toward her. And she goes, oh, this Hebrew slave came to sleep with me, to harass me, to rape me. Actually, he tried to rape me, and as I screamed, he ran away. Look at this clothes. And so then who will they believe? Joseph could have said, like, I didn't do it. But he's a slave. He's a Hebrew slave. And this is Potiphar's wife, who is of power to hire anyone, fire anyone. So they all probably were on her side. And Potiphar heard this, and he became enraged. Of course. But then he throws Joseph into a prison, which is kind of an interesting thing to do, because he could have been killed, right? You try to rape my wife, your master's wife, just put him to death. He could have done that, but he threw him instead into a prison. And another interesting thing is that in that prison were people who were of pretty high positions. So a cupbearer and a baker to Pharaoh. And these are very, very intimate people who have to do with the life of the Pharaoh. And so they were influential people. For some reason, they were not favored. they were hated, and they were thrown into prison. And so Joseph, now probably he's devastated, but he has been in close communication with God, and God just probably gave him this idea, get to know some people in this prison, although it's a prison. And so instead of just going to the corner and just being in a depressed mood and like God has abandoned me, I don't want to live, he actually started talking with people. And so he talked to the cupbearer and the baker, and they're like, hey kid, well, he's not a kid anymore, he's probably in his 20s, and they're like, all right, we had strange dreams, and the cupbearer and the baker had different dreams of similar kind of theme. And Joseph was not only a dreamer, but he was an interpreter of dreams. That was part of his gift. And so Joseph was able to interpret the dreams for those two people. He said, baker, your dream actually says that you will be taken out and you'll be killed. You'll be executed in 3 days. Cupbearer, by the way, you'll be released in 3 days and you'll be able to serve the Pharaoh again. And things came to be like, it happened the way Joseph actually told them. Now, the cupbearer went out to serve the Pharaoh again, but he forgot that Joseph had asked him, please remember me. Please tell Pharaoh that I am an innocent man. I didn't do anything to Potiphar's wife. So please release me. And he said yes, and then when he went out, actually he forgot. Can you imagine staying in the prison, and then this person, the only hope that he had in terms of pleading with Pharaoh so that he would be released was gone, right? But instead of saying, okay, my God, why have you abandoned me? You are, you're not listening to my prayers. How is it that he forgot? Instead of that, he just remained faithful to God. And soon after, Pharaoh had nightmares. And so he was just struggling. He was like, oh, these two dreams are so bothersome, I can't go to sleep. Is there anybody in this country, any magician? Because by the way, Egypt was full of people who were kind of spiritual, like witches and magicians and sorcerers, and and he said, put out an announcement, tell all the magicians and sorcerers and fortune tellers and whoever that might be have any kind of spiritual abilities should gather in my palace and interpret my dreams, because I'm being tortured, I can't sleep. And so when all the sorcerers and witch doctors and whoever magicians gathered, he made it really difficult. I'm not going to tell you what my dream is about. You tell me what my dream is about first, then interpret. So no one was able to tell him what his dreams were. And so he's completely angry, and it's like, get rid of all these people. Okay, is there any guy, any person who can actually do this for me? And then the cupbearer, wanting to please Pharaoh, finally remembered, oh, you know what, there was a Joseph guy in the prison, in the king's prison, who could actually know what the dream is about and what the dream is, and then interpret the dream. So then Pharaoh goes, go ahead and get him immediately. And so Joseph is, they sent people to Joseph to get Joseph, and probably he was in prison, like with bushy hair, he's not in good shape. He probably didn't take a shower for a long time, and so they're like, okay, we're gonna cut your hair, shave your beard, we're gonna make you wash, and you need to present yourself before Pharaoh immediately. And so quickly he was brought up right before Pharaoh. And what happens is Pharaoh says, okay, so you're that smart guy, and he goes, no, I have the ability to be able to tell what your dream is about, what your dream is, and then to interpret it. But that ability did not come from myself. He used to boast as a dreamer and interpreter. He was like, oh, listen, this was my dream. He used to be like that when he was 17, right? But now he's like, listen, I know what your dream is, and I know what that means. I can interpret it, but this ability came from God, Yahweh. And so you want me to do it? And Pharaoh goes, okay, go ahead. And Joseph was able to tell what the dreams were. And these two dreams are related, by the way. It means that there will be 7 prosperous years where you can actually gather crops abundantly. And you're going to have leftover, certainly. And then the next dream says you're going to have 7 years of famine where you have almost no crops whatsoever. And so people are going to actually die of starvation. So what I suggest, okay, even after sharing what the interpretation of the dream was, he goes, here's a solution. So why don't you gather all the crops and seeds and fruits and whatever into your storage during those 7 years of prosperity, great harvest. And then for the next 7 years, you're going to actually distribute the grains that you already gained. And by the way, you can actually sell it at a price, and your country will be so strong. Your kingdom will last. And Pharaoh was like, wow, this is incredible. Nobody else was able to do this. So I'm going to actually make him the prime minister of my country. And so instantaneously, at the age of 30, I believe, he became a prime minister of Egypt. He's a Hebrew guy. He used to be a slave. He was falsely accused. He was imprisoned. But now, all of a sudden, he's a prime minister. His faith grew so much. He learned to trust. He learned to acknowledge that all his gifts came from God, and that God was with him, that his life was in God's hands. So he was just a very humble and genuine person by this time. And along the way, you can kind of tell later on by the passages that he actually processed his hurts and wounds from the dysfunctional family so much, to the degree that he was able to forgive them even before. So he was married and he had 2 kids, right? Now, when he sees his brothers, you can tell that he became really strategic, wise, but at the same time, he already forgave them. He knew how to deal with this sneaky people, because most of his brothers were very manipulative, and they were liars, and he knew exactly how to deal with them. But at the same time, he was so forgiving, and I can kind of tell that he had forgiven them already, not when he saw them, but because part of the journey, even the journey of Christian education, is that as you walk closer to God and allow God's Holy Spirit to talk to you, the Holy Spirit will always urge you to forgive others, to let go. And so probably Joseph heard that voice, and he probably forgave all of them. But he had a reason to be strategic about how he led this reconciliation, because he knew them as tricky people. They tricked each other. They tricked father, and they were not, they probably did not really look back at themselves and say, oh, you know what, I have sinned against our brother, and they probably didn't really reflect on their sins either. But although like some of them actually turned out to be that, if you read the passage carefully, that they reflected on their sinful actions. Not all of them. And they're like, oh, you know what? Now this thing is happening to us because of the sins that we committed in the past. So some of them have done it, but then Joseph wanted to make sure that everyone actually reflected back, and they were admitting their sins and asking for forgiveness. So he's very, very wise at the age of 30 now. So God coordinates all the scenes, and there's a famine in the land where Jacob lived. Jacob and the 11 brothers lived. And so because of famine, they needed some grain, and they heard that there's grain in Egypt. And so that's so Jacob is very old now, and then he has middle-aged sons. Now Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, so Jacob said to his sons, why are you looking at each other? And then he said, look, I've heard that there's grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some grain for us there, so that we'll live and not die. So Joseph's brothers went down, 10 of them. So there used to be 12 children. What happened? Okay, so one was Joseph. He was sold into slavery and now became, a long story short, prime minister. So he's missing. So 11 of them. His younger brother Benjamin. Okay, Benjamin was left. Well, Jacob sends his sons, but then just like he favored Joseph, he favors Benjamin. It's because he loves Rachel, his younger wife. And so 10 of them go out, but Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob did not send for his head, and after that might happen to him. The sons of Israel went to buy grain, and with the others were coming, because a famine was in the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was the ruler over the land, a ruler. Number 2 guy next to Pharaoh. He was the provider of grain for all the people of the earth. Then Joseph's brothers came and bowed down to him with faces to the ground. See, actually, his dream came true, but in a different way. It did not come true right away, or in the ways that Joseph or the brothers had expected. Because God had a different plan. The dreams were certainly from God. He had a plan to fulfill it, but then it came in a different direction. Now Joseph, by this time, he was fluently bilingual. He was a wise leader and a ruler. He was a prudent man, and also because he was wearing this Egyptian high official's clothes, his brothers did not recognize him. So then Joseph's brothers came and bowed down to him with faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he made himself unrecognizable to them. Then he spoke harshly and said to them, where have you come from? So in this situation, Joseph was speaking in Egyptian language. He was not using Hebraic language, although he knew how to speak it, to become not recognizable by his brothers. From the land of Canaan, the brothers said, to buy grain as food. Though Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then Joseph remembered the dreams he had dreamed about them. So Joseph is not, he he remembers the dreams that he had when he was around 17 years of age, but he's not always thinking about it, and he probably forgot about it in a long time because his situations has nothing to do with his dreams. It's not the brothers bowing down to him, but brothers selling him to the hands of Ishmaelites, and he was sold as a slave. He was thrown into prison, and he probably forgot, like, what kind of dream is this? Like, maybe it was not from God, right? But this moment when brothers came to bow down to him, Joseph remembered the dreams he had dreamed about them. He said to them, "You are spies. You've come to see the undefended places in the land." So like he's very sharp, and he's very strategic about this. Like, okay, you guys are spies. I don't believe you. "No, my lord," they said to him. "Your servants came to buy grain as food. All of us were sons of one man. We're honest. Your servants have never been spies." "Not so," he said to them. Joseph said to them, "Rather, you've come to see the undefended places in the land." But they said, "We, your servants, are 12 brothers, sons of one man in the land of Canaan. Look, the youngest is with our father today, and the other one is no more." So now they're trying to prove their honesty, and they're like, "Okay, listen to our stories. I mean, I will tell you the truth, and we're not lying to you." Joseph said to them, "It's just like I told you when I said, 'You're spies. By this you'll be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you'll not leave from here until your youngest brother comes here. Send one from among yourself to get your brother while you remain confined, in order to test your words, to see whether the truth is with you. If not, by the life of Pharaoh, you're definitely spies." So what he's saying is, wow, I don't believe you anymore. And by the way, if you say that you have the youngest brother, which is Benjamin, which is blood brother of Joseph, Joseph and Benjamin are the brothers by the same set of parents, right? Jacob and Rachel. And he's like, "Oh my goodness, like my blood brother, Benjamin, I want to see him." And then he said it in such a way that they will have to bring him. So he put them together in custody for 3 days. And Joseph said to them on the 3rd day, "Do this and you'll live." Okay, I have the power to make you live or make you die. And so you better do this. "I fear God. If you're honest, let one of your brothers remain as a prisoner in the guardhouse where you've been, while you go and bring grain for the hunger in your homes. And your youngest brother bring to me, so that your words can be verified, and you won't die." So they did. Then each man said to his brother, "We're truly guilty for our brother." They're talking about Joseph. "We saw the distress of his soul when he begged us for mercy in the cistern. Please get me out of here. But we didn't listen. That's why this distress has come to us. Now we have to lose another brother." Reuben answered them and said, "Didn't I tell you, don't sin against the boy? But you didn't listen. Now see how his blood is now being accounted for." They did not know that Joseph was listening, since there was an interpreter between them. So Joseph was speaking the Egyptian language, and there was an interpreter who was interpreting Egyptian language to Hebrew language. He turned away from them and wept. Look at Joseph. Oh, all these memories are coming back. "Oh my goodness, I see that the dream was actually true. It came from God, and my brothers bowed down to me. And by the way, my blood brother Benjamin is still alive. And wow, this is so of God. Oh, I miss my family, and especially my parents." So he weeps. When Joseph turned back to them and spoke to them, he took Simeon from them and tied him up before their eyes. Simeon is the one who actually suggested that, we're going to kill him. And then actually he brought the rope, the bloody rope. They killed an animal and splashed the blood over. And then he goes like, "Father, isn't this Joseph's clothes?" He's the one who did that. Now, then Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to return each man's money to his sack. and to give them provisions for the journey. So it was done for them. Then they loaded their grain on their donkeys and left from there. As one of them opened his sack to give fodder to his donkey at the lodge, he saw his money. Behold, it was in the opening of his bag. So he said to his brothers, "My money has been returned. Look, it's in my bag." Their hearts sank. So it was the money for the grains, right? So then if the money was returned to them, it's like, I didn't pay it. It's just like, we stole the grains, right? Their hearts sank. Trembling, each one turned to his brother and said, "What is this that God has done to us?" So they're definitely feeling that this is all God's doing, you know. When they came together to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them, saying, "The Lord of the land spoke with us harshly and took us as spies of the land." But we said to him, "We're honest. We've never been spies. We have 12 brothers, sons of we're 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is with our father today in the land of Canaan." Then the man, the Lord of the land, said to us, "By this I'll know if you're honest. Leave one of your brothers with me. As for the hunger of your homes, take and go, and bring your youngest brother to me, so that I may know you are not spies, but you're honest. I'll give you back your brother, and you can move about freely in the land." So he says, by this game, by this play, he is saying, "I want to check your honesty." And it's very interesting that even in the midst of play, he uses the test. He says, "This is a test of your honesty," because his brothers have been dishonest from the beginning. They took Joseph and put him into the cistern, and actually later sold into the hands of the Ishmaelites. And they came back home and said, "Father, isn't this your son's robe? He must have been killed by an animal." So by lies, from beginning to the end, they were lying. So Joseph is saying, "Okay, you know what? Are you now honest? Did you change? Are you as dishonest as you were back then?" Then their father Jacob said to them, You've made me childless. Joseph is no more. Now Simeon is gone, and next you'll take Benjamin. Everything is against me." So one by one, his sons are taken away, and so he's like in distress for a good reason. Then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, "You can put my 2 sons to death if I don't bring him back to you." So Reuben, he's the one who actually tried to rescue Joseph, right? And he says, "I take a vow that I will surely bring Benjamin back. If not, then you can kill my own sons." And that's how much I'm pretty sure that I will be able to bring him back. I will bring him back, in order to comfort Jacob, right? "Put him in my hand, and I will return to him to you. I will return him to you." But he said, "My son will not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he alone remains. And if harm should happen to him along the way you're going, you bring my gray hair down to Sheol in grief." So basically what Jacob is saying, did my son Joseph die? Now you're about to take his younger brother. If anything happens to him that he doesn't, he gets killed or something, then I think I'm gonna just die and go to Sheol. So let's see what happens next. Now the famine was still severe in the land. Remember, 7 years of famine in Egypt, and this famine was not just in Egypt, but in the land of Canaan. The land of Canaan is supposedly a land that where milk and honey flows, right? But when God does something, then we don't have any control. Overnight, all the crops are gone, and we get to starvation. And that can happen anywhere, anytime. And that's how we know that God is all powerful. He's good, but when He acts on something, we can't change that. And we need to live in awareness and humility of that. So when they had eaten all the grain they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, so like they brought quite a bit of grains, but they ran out of it. Go back and buy us a little more food. But Judah said to him, the man warned us solemnly, you will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. If you will send our brother along with us, we'll go down and buy food for you. But if you will not send him, we'll not go down, because the man said to us, you will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. Israel, okay, and that's another name for Jacob. Why did you bring this trouble on me by telling the man you had another brother? So isn't this God's doing? Why did they bring up their brothers, right, in front of Joseph? It was God's doing, so that they would just have to deal with this. They would face this kind of situation. The brothers replied, the man questioned us closely about ourselves and our family. Is your father still living? He asked us. Do you have another brother? We simply answered his questions. How were we to know? He would say, bring your brother down here. So Joseph actually probed them in a way that would lead them to have to say that, yes, we used to have one more brother, and he's no more. And we have another brother that we left at home. Then Judah said to Israel, his father, send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee this safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. So he's saying the same thing as Reuben, right? If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life. As it is, if we had not delayed, we could have gone and returned twice. Then his father Israel said to them, if it must be, then do this. Put some of the best products of the land in your bags and take them down to the man as a gift, a little balm and a little honey, some spices and myrrh, and some pistachio nuts and almonds. So these are precious products. In the land of famine, you won't get this. Like you have limited supply, and certainly these are very valuable things. Some of these items were actually the gifts for a king. And so he says, take them with you. Take double the amount of silver with you. Even bring money. For you must return the silver that was put back into the mouths of your sacks. So they came back home. They're like, oh, all the money has been returned to us. Now we're considered as thieves. Now when we go back, we're gonna have like double trouble. And so his father is saying, take some silvers with you so that you can pay back all the amount. Take double the amount of silver with you, for you must return the silver that was put back into the mouths of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother also and go back to the man at once, and may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you. Simeon and Benjamin, because he thinks Joseph died. As for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved. So at the face of death, like if they stay in the land of Canaan where there's no crops anymore, eventually they're going to starve to death. And maybe there are people who are already dying, right? So he's like, okay, now we have to make a decision. Either you go back and get some grains for us, 3 generations, your children too, otherwise we're going to die, so go back. The man did as Joseph told him and took the men to Joseph's house. So the man took the gifts and doubled the amount of silver, and Benjamin also. So they finally brought Benjamin with them. They hurried down to Egypt and presented themselves to Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, take these men to my house, slaughter an animal, and prepare a meal. They are to eat with me at noon. Wow, so he's very prudent by now, Joseph. You know, when you see your beloved younger brother, blood brother, you've been just wanting to see him for how many years? At least 13, 14 years, right? So many years. And he might have this urge to just go and just throw his arms around him and just give him a hug, right? But he doesn't do that. Verse 17, the man did as Joseph told him and took the man to Joseph's house. Now the men were frightened when they were taken to his house. They thought, we were brought here because of the silver that was put back into our sacks the first time. He wants to attack us and overpower us and seize us as slaves and take our donkeys. So they went up to Joseph's steward and spoke to him at the entrance of the house. We beg your pardon, our lord, they said. We came down here the first time to buy food, but at the place where we stopped for the night, we opened our sacks and each of us found his silver, the exact weight in the mouths of his sack. So we have brought it back with us. We have also brought additional silver with us to buy food. We don't know who put our silver in our sacks. It's all right, he said. Don't be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks. So at this time, of course, it was Joseph's order to put the money back into their sacks because he wanted to give them resources. You know, I want my family to do well. You don't have to pay me, right? But then this guard knows Joseph very well. Joseph was being the channel of blessings to his brothers and his whole household now. And he knew that he was now a channel of God's work. God was working through him. He knew that very well. So now that he became a prime minister and his brothers bowed down to him, he's like, oh, see, my dream was fulfilled. Like, he's not like that. Oh, you know what? All this time, to this point, God brought me so far. Although I did not understand what he was doing and why he was doing the things that he was doing. But now I know that everything is in God's hands and he has a plan, some kind of great plan that I never imagined that I would be part of. And so I want to know, like, what is your will, God? And yes, I will minister to these people. I will rule over this land according to your will, was what he was doing. And then he puts the money back into the brothers' sacks because that's how he felt led, right? And he knew very well that he was being a channel of blessings for God, for God's people, and he was just used by God's hands. And so he probably shared with the guard saying, you know what, this is God's doing. It's not me doing the things. I mean, I'm making the order. I'm giving you the instructions, but then this is God's will that I'm carrying out. Then he brought Simeon up to them. So Simeon was staying there for a while, and he probably thought about a lot of thoughts went on his mind, right? The steward took the men into Joseph's house, gave them water to wash their feet, and provided fodder for their donkeys. They prepared the gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon because they had heard that they were to eat there. When Joseph came home, they presented to him the gifts they had brought into the house, and they bowed down before him to the ground. He asked them how they were, and they said, "How is your aged father you told me about? Is he still living?" So he is, greatly concerned about his father, right? They replied, "Your servant, our father, is still alive and well." And they bowed down, prostrating themselves before him. As he looked about and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went to his private room and wept there. After he had washed his face, he came out and controlling himself. So he is exercising self-control by this time, and said, "Serve the food." They served him by himself, the brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, for that is detestable to Egyptians. Okay, so Joseph becoming the prime minister of Egypt is something really extraordinary, not only because it was a promotion from slavery, he was a slave and then became a prime minister. Not only that, by their spiritual principles, it was detestable to eat with Hebrews, with another ethnic group. So they couldn't even eat together, and he is ruling over the country. And so this is something this could not have happened without God. The men had been seated before him in the order of their ages, from the firstborn to the youngest. So the Egyptians coming, like, you sit here, you sit there, and it was part of the order of ages. When and they looked at each other in astonishment when portions were served to them from Joseph's table. So Joseph has this giant table, and then food is distributed from there. Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone else's. So they feasted and drank freely with him. There's a reason larger portion was given to Benjamin, right? Now Joseph gave these instructions to the steward of his house: fill the men's sacks with as much food as they can carry. Give them abundantly. I want to bless my brothers and my whole family household. And put each man's silver in the mouths of his sack. Then put my cup, the silver one, in the mouths of the youngest one's sack, Benjamin's sack, along with the silver for his grain. And he did as Joseph said. As morning dawned, the men were sent on their way with their donkeys. So this is another test that Joseph brilliantly invented, because he not only wanted to test their honesty. Now, okay, so you hated your half-brother and sold him into slavery. You lost your brother and you lied to your father. Now, if the old scenario is brought back again, it's like, living the past experience. Like, if the past is brought back here, like, are you going to respond differently? Or are you going to be the same as what he's going to test? As morning dawned, the men were sent on their way with their donkeys. They had not gone far from the city when Joseph said to his steward, go after those men at once, and when you catch up with them, say to them, why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this a cup my master drinks from and also uses for divination? So, of course, Joseph does not do divination, but Egyptians used to, and he's utilizing their culture. This is a wicked thing you have done. So this is a spiritual instrument, and you stole it, is the accusation that he was going to make. When he caught up with them, he repeated these words to them. But they said to him, why does my Lord say such things? Far be it from your servants to do anything like that. We even brought back to you from the land of Canaan the silver we found inside the mouths of your sacks. So why would we steal silver or gold from your master's house? If any of your servants is found to have it, he will die, and the rest of us will become my Lord's slaves. Very well then, he said, let it be as you say. Whoever is found to have it will become my slave. The rest of you will be free from blame. So he's claiming one of the brothers as a slave. Okay, so if this happens, what are you going to do, right? Each of them quickly lowered his sack to the ground and opened it. Then the steward proceeded to search, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. At this, they tore their clothes. This is Hebrews' way of showing their sorrow or just incredible shock and just expressing their disbelief. Like, this is unbelievably terrible. This is so tragic. Then they all loaded their donkeys and return to the city. So Benjamin, because the silver cup that was supposedly used for divination in Egyptian's culture, and especially, that's the position of property of number 2 guy of Egypt. And so he's like, okay, you're a thief now. Okay, you have to stay here. Joseph was still in the house. So Simeon was released, but Benjamin is captured now. Joseph was still in the house when Judah and his brothers came in, and they threw themselves to the ground before him. Joseph said to them, "What is this you have done? Don't you know that a man like me can find things out by divination?" So he's saying, it's by my divination that I found out the order of your age, and also that the fact that, like, my cup was stolen and it's in one of your bags. Like, I found out that by divination. "What can we say to my lord?" Judah replied. "What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. For now, my lord's slaves, we ourselves, and the one who was found to have the cup." But Joseph said, "Far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man who was found to have the cup will be my slave. The rest of you, go back to your father in peace." Then Judah went up to him and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord. Let me speak a word to my lord. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself." So yeah, Joseph was a prime minister, number 2 guy, but he was as powerful as Pharaoh himself, because all the domestic matters were interested into his care, and Pharaoh trusted him a lot. So if he made a decision, it was like Pharaoh's decision. "My lord asked his servants, 'Do you have a father or a brother?' And we answer, 'We have an aged father, and there is a young son born to him in his old age. His brother is dead, and he is the only one of his mother's sons left, and his father loves him.'" They're explaining the situation. "Then you said to your servants, 'Bring him down to me so I can see him for myself.' And I said to my lord, 'The boy cannot leave his father. If he leaves him, his father will die out of sorrow,' right? But you told your servants, 'Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again.' When we went back to your servant, my father, we told him what my lord had said. Then our father said, 'Go back and buy a little more food.' But we said, 'We cannot go down. Only if our youngest brother is with us will we go. We cannot see the man's face unless your youngest brother is with us.' Your servant, my father, said to us, 'You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One of them went away from me, and I said, he has surely been torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and harm comes to him, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in misery. So now if the boy is not with us, when I go back to your servant, my father, and my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring the gray head of your father down to the grave in sorrow. Your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, if I do not bring him back to you, I'll bear the blame before you, my father, all my life. Now then, please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy." So he's pleading now. "Please take me as your slave and let Benjamin go, because if Benjamin doesn't show up, if our father finds out that he's left into Egypt again, he's gonna die. So I'd rather remain here." Probably he's like in his 40s or 50s or something like that. He's like, "I'll take the place of the boy. Please send him back." So this is very different than their attitude before. Their attitude was like, let's get rid of the boy. Let's get rid of Joseph so that we can be the heir. We don't have to see him boast. We don't care about our brother, but he's like, I care about my brother now, and especially because dad cares about him, I will take his place. It's a very different approach than before, right? "How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father." So Joseph sees that the brothers have a different attitude now, represented by Judah. And Joseph could no longer control himself. He's like, okay, my brother's really changed. Oh, God's good work. Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants. And he cried out, have everyone leave my presence. So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. I am Joseph. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer because they were terrified at his presence. You came back to life? We thought you were dead. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I'm your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. So when Joseph actually put the money back into their sacks the first time and the second time too, he knew, oh, you know what? I wanted to just save my life here. I wanted to go back home. That was my only dream. But I didn't care about like my brothers bowing down to me anymore. But, oh, look at this. God is doing something in my life. And there was a reason I had to go through all this. Now in the end, oh, God is using me to bless people, to feed them, to keep them from dying. All right, you know what? I'm privileged to be a God's channel. And that's why he put the money back. And he says, now, it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. You think that you sold me into slavery, you did evil, but God used it. That was God's will. God, although it was not a pleasant way of doing it, but God allowed it so that I will come to Egypt, rise above by faith, and to be in a position to be able to save people by distributing grains, including you, to save my people. I see God's doing everywhere. I see God's providence everywhere. So don't be so guilty. Don't feel so angry about yourself. For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land. And just after 2 years, like people are starving and they had to turn to a different country, right? Can you imagine 7 years after? And for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So he's a symbolic messianic figure. This is a physical salvation, just to allow people to eat so that they won't die. But this is so prophetic. Joseph is a type of Christ, meaning he lived in the Old Testament era, thousands of years before Jesus came to being. But Jesus would come to rescue people from eternal death, not the physical death, but eternal death. And we're going to talk about that later. He gave himself to us so that our lives would be rescued, meaning that is God's will. And he was used as God's channel of bringing life to the situations that will bring death to people. Now, Joseph is doing the same thing, but he's only doing it in a physical sense and relational sense. The dead relationships are being alive, are being restored, and he's symbolically representing Jesus in the Old Testament era. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. Wow. He made me father to Pharaoh, Lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds and all you have. I will provide for you there because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it's really I who am speaking to you, tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly. So then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him, weeping. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterward, his brothers talked with them. When the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Tell your brothers, do this. Load your animals and return to the land of Canaan, and bring your father and your families back to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land." Also directed to tell them, "Do this. Take some carts from Egypt for your children and your wives. Get your father and come. Never mind about your belongings, because the best of all Egypt will be yours." Wow, what a favor. Pharaoh doesn't have to do this, right? He can allow, since Joseph is the number 2 guy, to bring his family back here, but then he doesn't have to allow all kinds of favor, but he is, because God's favor is upon Joseph. So the sons of Israel did this. Joseph gave them carts as Pharaoh had commanded, and he also gave them provisions for their journey. To each of them he gave new clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver, 5 sets of clothes. And this is what he sent to his father: 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and other provisions for his journey. Then he sent his brothers away, and as they were leaving, he said to them, "Don't quarrel on the way." Now, he became so mature. He's like, you know what? I know my brothers, they repented, but then, still there's a tendency. So don't fight on the way over all the possessions. Just be thankful and be humble and love each other. So they went out of Egypt and came to their father Joseph in the land of Canaan. They told him, "Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is the ruler of all Egypt." Jacob was stunned. He did not believe them. But when they told him about everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, so basically he sent like a chariot, the spirit of their father Jacob revived, and Israel said, "I am convinced my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." God's work is amazing, and that's why it's a privilege to know him, to be in communication, to be in relationship with him. And Christianity is all about being in this relationship with God, who cares so deeply, who is so carefully coordinating everything. Although we may not see, we may not understand what's going on, we may not understand what God's doing, and they didn't know either. But in the end, they were able to actually see the good work, the amazing work that any human beings could not make happen, and even other people were able to see, right? And his dreams are fulfilled, but it's fulfilled beyond imagination. God had a better plan than just those dreams coming to being fulfilled. He did that, but then there was something greater. Just like Abraham. Abraham was promised to have a son to inherit a land, and his descendants will be many. That was not it. Through him would come the Messiah. Through him, many nations will be blessed. It was just something beyond his imagination, his capacity to understand. So you and I are called to live a life that really matters to his kingdom, that matters to this earth. And I know that many of us feel very small, and not capable, of doing anything great. But when we are accompanied by God, when God starts working in us and through us, through Christian education and spiritual transformation, and only when we submit to him day by day, which is not an easy thing to do, day by day, then one day we find ourselves, not only our dreams have been fulfilled, if the dreams came from God, but also, and the heart's desire. Sometimes God puts into our heart's desire. Not only that's fulfilled, but there was a greater purpose than that. It's not just the individual pleasure, but rather God had a grandiose plan because He is a great God. He makes things great. And so we can actually follow, we can trust Him. So then there are different methods of education in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament era, how was Christian education done? That we inherit as Christ followers. So not all the traditions have been thrown out. We inherited some of the traditions. And so these are some of the methods. Oral tradition to tell the stories. So just like parents just raise their little children, much of the tradition is orally transferred. Altars or monuments. So, what are these rocks? What is this monument, Dad or Mom? And they would tell them these stones. God actually told them to pile up these rocks in the middle of the river because He is the one who actually parted this river, and He wants us to remember forever by these rocks that He's mighty God who actually brings supernatural events that we could have died before we crossed the Jordan River, but He parted the river so that nobody died, nobody sank, but we were rescued, we were saved, and we actually entered into the promised land. So these piles of rocks, don't remove them, but whenever you see them, remember what I told you. So that kind of story. Altars and monuments that accompany stories, right? And festivals or celebrations, the same thing. The Passover, we don't celebrate Passover anymore in Christianity, but we celebrate life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, especially resurrection of Jesus Christ that happened not coincidentally, but by careful coordination of God's hands during Passover, because He's the Passover lamb. In the Old Testament era, the Passover was being delivered from Egypt. Now, we're talking about Genesis right now, but later on we're going to talk about Exodus. And Exodus is about, the Pharaoh dying. They forgot about Hebrew people. There came another Pharaoh that came into position later on, who was not really, who did not look at Hebrews in favorable eyes. He wanted to actually get rid of them. And so the Hebrew people actually become slaves. And God delivers them from the hands of Egyptians. And along the way, they had to do a couple of things. They had to first, number one, plaster their doorposts with the blood of a lamb so that the spirit of death would pass by and not come into their household to kill their firstborns, which happened to all the Egyptians' households. Number two, they had to hurriedly eat the meat, and they actually had to cross the Red Sea. The Red Sea was large enough and deep enough that if you go in there, then you would be drowned to death. And God parted the Red Sea, which is incredible. And they actually crossed over by foot. And when the Egyptian chariots and their soldiers followed, then the sea actually covered them, so that they would all drown. And so this event is remembered and told repeatedly throughout generations as they partake the same kind of meal, the lamb, Passover lamb, and bitter herbs, and the unleavened bread, the bread without yeast. So they eat that every year to remember what God has done for them. So this is one of the festivals or celebrations by which they remember God. And then symbols. Symbols are like, the priests. Priests actually wore the robe, and they have Urim and Thummim, and they always had this decoration on their robes that symbolize 12 tribes, and there are 12 gemstones, and they represent 12 tribes of Israel. And so daily they're singing, okay, I am representative of these 12 tribes to God, and also I am representing God to these 12 tribes. And any other symbols? Symbols like the Ark of the Covenant, Ark of the Covenant is created according to God's instructions. He actually designed it and said, okay, these should be the measurements. And then inside there, put manna, Aaron's staff, and the Ten Commandments. And so that is symbolic of God's presence. So that is placed in the Holy of the Holies, and it was to be kept really holy. And whenever the great priest, and people are not able to actually enter into that Holy of the Holies, but they know it's there, and it's a symbolic representation of God's presence. So like they have symbols, and then of course worship. It's a worship culture. The reason we're created is to worship God. And when I say worship, I'm not talking about just going to church and do a formal ritual. That's not what I mean. Worship is a heart attitude, and it's a lifestyle. And we can talk about this a little bit later too. But being in constant communication with God, and just being in reverence of His presence, and just giving Him honor through our words and our thoughts, that's part of worship. And the worship actually comes from the word prostrate, bow down. And so we are expressing our reverent fear of God by worshiping. So these are some methods of Christian education. These are all so it's not like, okay, you sit down and then I'm gonna just stand here or sit here to give you instructions. That's part of it too, but they utilize a lot of tangible and visible channels, so that it will be very much, it will stick to their memories. Passages such as the opening sentence of the prologue to Ecclesiasticus, the law, the prophets, the later writers have left us a wealth of valuable teachings, and we should praise Israel for the instruction and wisdom they provide. So certain passages were used to educate the people of God. And then pre-exilic, meaning before the exile into slavery. Prior to exile of 586 and 587, the primary teachers were the tribe and the family. So like who were in charge of Christian education back then? It was the tribe and the family. So it was a community that would just correct everyone, to transfer all the information. If there was any memory, they did tons of memory. The traditions were orally transferred, and so then if anybody cites slightly wrong, then the whole community will come and fix that person. So the oral tradition was pretty reliable, and it was self-correcting. Particularly the parents. So the teachers were the parents, and the education was focused on the children, because although children are easily dismissed and they are taken lightly many times, simply because they don't contribute to the church in any way the adults do, but educating from childhood is very important, because it's going to last for a lifetime, right? And so they focus on children. And Hebrews were originally nomadic tribes. So training involved actual participation in the various agrarian occupations. So they're working, right? Farming, tent making, making of tools, and fishing. Knowledge was passed through generations through stories, during long evenings around the campfires, conversations around the well, or in the home doing domestic chores. So it was like in work context, right? That the education was done. It was not like, okay, so let go of all the things, like don't even do the dishes, come down and just sit and I'll tell you. But rather it was like part of their lifestyle. So having said that, let's come to close. We're gonna move on to chapter 3 next time, because you kind of have an idea, general idea of how Christian education find its origin in the back. Although the Old Testament education is not it, but we can find kind of traces, or we can kind of find